Number 10. Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos was a prostitute who ended the lives of many men in Florida. In 1989 to 1990, while engaging in street prostitution along highways, she shot dead and robbed 7 of her male clients. She claimed that her clients had either taken advantage of or tried to take advantage of her, and that all the deaths were committed in self-defense. Eileen was sentenced to death for 6 of the deaths, and on October 9, 2002, after 12 years on Florida's death row, she was executed by lethal injection. She had no remorse for these men and said, "I want the world to know I killed these men as cold as ice. I've hated humans for a long time. I am a serial killer." This really shows how she had no remorse for her actions and that she didn't really commit these crimes as self-defense. Number 9. Albert Fish. Albert Fish ended the lives of many of the young and was suspected in at least 5 homicides. He was nicknamed the Boogeyman for his predatory behavior. He confessed to 3 deaths that police were able to trace to a known homicide, and he confessed to stabbing at least 2 other people. Albert once boasted his number of victims was about 100. He abducted Grace Budd in 1928, and in an abandoned home in Winchester County, New York, he ended her life and devoured her body. He wrote a letter to Grace's mother telling her about the crimes he committed against her daughter. He said, "When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her and she said she would tell her mama. How did she kick, bite, and scratch? I then cut her in small pieces so I could take my meat to my rooms, cook it, and eat it." Now this is truly disturbing, and I can't imagine how the mother felt receiving that letter. Number 8. Peter Kürten. Peter Kürten was a German man known as the Vampire of Dusseldorf who took the lives and took advantage of many people between February and November 1929 in the city of Dusseldorf. The first death he definitely committed occurred on May 25, 1913. During the course of a burglary, he encountered a girl named Christine Klein asleep in her bed. Peter strangled her, then slashed her twice across the throat with a pocket knife. This made him excited down there, if you know what I mean, due to him hearing the blood dripping from her wounds onto the floor by her bed and on his hand. He then did this multiple times to countless other victims. Then one day, Peter confessed to his wife that he was the Vampire of Dusseldorf. She reported him to the police and he was arrested and was charged with 9 counts of homicide and 7 of attempted homicide. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity to each of the charges, but he was found guilty of everything and sentenced to death. Peter displayed no emotion as the sentence was passed, and at 6 o'clock on the morning of July 2nd, 1931, Peter was beheaded. Now this isn't a confession, but more of a question, but it is so gross. Since he loved blood, his last words were, "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be a pleasure to end all pleasures." Wow, that is just disgusting. Number 7. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy kidnapped, took advantage of, and ended the lives of dozens of young women during the 1970s and possibly earlier. Ted often employed his charm to disguise his intentions when kidnapping victims and extended this tactic to law enforcement, the media, and the criminal justice system to maintain his claims of innocence. He typically approached women in public places, either asking for help by faking an injury or impersonating an authority figure. Once tricked into being led away, they would then be bludgeoned unconscious and taken elsewhere to be taken advantage of and eventually die. In 1975, he was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. The day before his execution, he told Dr. James Dobson, "Serial killers do not stand out in a crowd, and if gone unnoticed, look just like the average person. As we serial killers are your sons, we are your husbands, and we grew up in regular families," which is just chilling. Then while in prison after more than a decade of denials, Ted also confessed to ending the lives of more than 30 people committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978, but experts estimate the real number could exceed 100. Number 6. Carl Panzram. Carl Panzram was truly an evil man. He committed so many crimes, most of them the unthinkable. In prison confessions and in his autobiography, Carl confessed to having committed the deaths of 21 boys and men, only 5 of which could be corroborated. He is suspected of having ended the lives of more than 100 boys and men in the United States alone. He also confessed to have committed more than 1,000 acts of taking advantage of males of all ages. He wrote, "In my lifetime I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed thousands of burglaries, arsons, and last but not least, I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings. For all those things, I am not the least bit sorry. I have no conscience, so that does not worry me. I hate the whole damn human race, including myself." Number 5. Edmund Kemper. Edmund Kemper ended the lives of 10 people. These included his own mother and her best friend, his grandparents, and female college students hitchhiking in the vicinity of Santa Cruz County, California. He targeted the young female hitchhikers during his spree by luring them into his vehicle and driving them to secluded areas where he would end their lives before taking their corpses back to his home to be decapitated, dismembered, and violated. While speaking with Front Page Detective magazine, Edmund explained his thought process when finding his victims, saying, "One side of me says I'd like to talk to her, date her. The other side of me says I wonder what her head would look like on a stick." He also said, "The first time I had sex with a dead body, it makes you sick to your stomach." Number 4. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer ended the lives of many young men in Milwaukee, where he would then dismember them. It had been reported that he ended the lives of 17 males between 1978 and 1991. A total of 7 skulls, some painted, some bleached, were found in Jeffrey's bedroom and inside a closet. Investigators discovered collected blood drippings upon a tray at the bottom of Jeffrey's refrigerator, plus 2 human hearts and a portion of arm muscle. In his freezer, investigators discovered an entire torso, plus a bag of human organs and flesh stuck to the ice at the bottom. Elsewhere in his apartment, the investigators discovered 2 entire skeletons, a pair of severed hands, 2 severed and preserved male sex organs, a mummified scalp, and in a 57-gallon drum, 3 further dismembered torsos dissolving in an acid solution. A total of 74 Polaroid pictures detailing the dismemberment of his victims were also found. He was convicted of 16 counts of ending someone's life, and he was to serve 16 terms of life imprisonment on February 17, 1992. Now, while in jail, he talked about eating people and famously said, "I ate someone with a tattoo once. The ink made the meat taste like shh. Eat garlic to avoid vampires, get tattoos to avoid cannibals." So, there you have it. Tattoos can save you from those who eat other humans. Number 3. Robert Pickton. Robert Pickton ended the lives and took advantage of many as a former pig farmer who is suspected of being one of the most prolific criminals in Canadian history. After dropping out of school, Robert left a butcher's apprenticeship to begin working full-time at his family's pig farm. He is believed to have begun ending people's lives in the early 1980s after inheriting the farm. Arrested in 2002, he was convicted in 2007 of the second-degree homicide of 6 women and was also the subject of a lengthy investigation that yielded evidence of numerous other deaths. Robert was charged with the deaths of an additional 20 women, many of them from Vancouver's downtown east side. During the trial's first day of jury evidence, the Crown stated that Robert had confessed to 49 deaths to an undercover agent from the Office of Inspector General who was posing as a cellmate. The Crown reported that Robert told the officer he wanted to end the life of another woman to make an even 50 and that he was caught because he was sloppy, which is just chilling. Number 2. Joe Metheny. Joe Metheny ended the lives and took advantage of many people in the Baltimore, Maryland area. While he had claimed to end the lives of 13 people, sufficient evidence was only found to convict him of 2 homicides. Research later confirmed 3 more victims, though he had not been charged with them. According to Joe, after spending time with his victims, he felt himself compelled to strangle the women. He claimed that he used his victims' bodies to create ground beef, which he then sold at barbecues, which literally makes me want to throw up. He was sentenced to 2 life sentences for the deaths and served nearly 2 decades before dying behind bars in 2017. Now, a scary comment from him showed him how evil he really was, as he said, "The words I'm sorry will never come out, for they would be a lie." It is so crazy to me that someone could do those horrific things and feel nothing about the matter. And coming in at number 1 is Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a criminal who created a cult called the Manson family. It was active in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The group consisted of approximately 100 followers who lived an unconventional lifestyle and frequently used psychoactive substances. Now, the members of the cult believed that he was Jesus Christ and followed everything he said. Now, some of the members committed a series of 9 deaths at 4 locations in July and August of 1969. In 1971, Manson was convicted of first-degree homicide and conspiracy to commit homicide for the deaths of 7 people, including the film actress Sharon Tate. The prosecution contended that while Manson never directly ordered the deaths, his ideology constituted an overt act of conspiracy. Now, he has been clear that he has no remorse, as he once said. Remorse for what? You people have done everything in the world to me, doesn't that give me equal right? I can do anything I want to you people at any time I want to because that's what you've done to me. Maybe I should have slain 400 or 500 people, then I would have felt better. Then I would have felt that I really offered society something. You've got it stuck in your brain that I slayed somebody. What do you want to call me a slayer for? I've never slain anyone. I don't need to. I think it. I have it here.
Coming in number 10, we have It Was Tougher Than Al Capone. Al Capone is one of the most famous gangsters of all time. He was bringing booze to all the people when there was no way of getting your hands on the goods. Think if there was a person who was the face of the illegal weed trade and everyone saw him as one of the biggest, baddest people on the planet. That is this dude. He got his way no matter what the situation, and even in prison he was known to be treated like a king. Well, that was when he was locked up in Atlanta. There he was seen as a tough guy, but on the rock he was just another prisoner. While in Alcatraz he was treated like everyone else, and it didn't take him long to fall in place and become the prisoner that the state always wanted him to be. This might have been because the rock was so brutal of a stronghold that even the toughest men in history would be broken down by its walls, or it could have been the fact that he was teeming with syphilis. The dude had it so bad that it started to get in his brain, apparently made him very docile. I guess it's pretty easy to make a bad man good when his brain is melting away in his skull and he barely knows where he is half the time. Next on the list, we have Someone Swam to Shore. Yeah, it might be crazy to think that people could actually be pulling this off. It was 1.5 miles, which isn't impossible to do for today's athletes, but you have to remember that the people who would be pulling this off would have been in prison back in the 40s and 50s. They weren't people who were able to get in a lot of time training their cardio. You didn't have a treadmill in your cell, but there was a man who pulled it off. It was John Paul Scott. He jumped into the freezing waters of the San Francisco Bay and started swimming, but he was caught. He made it to the shore, but the trip was so brutal on his body that he passed out right when he made it to the bridge. He was way too cold and tired to keep moving, and the cops just found him laying there. He was able to escape by greasing up his body and sliding through the bars on his window. It was a pretty clever plan if you ask me, but this is something he should have tried to pull off in the summertime so he wouldn't have gotten the hypothermic shock when he reached the shore. Next we have Roy Gardner, one of the best breakout artists when it comes to escaping prison. This guy claimed that there wasn't a prison on earth that could hold him, and it turns out he was wrong. The guy broke out of 2 prisons back to back until the cops had enough of him. They decided they wanted to ship him off to the Rock. That's where he would spend the rest of his life. Maybe he was just too old and tired to try and slip away because there were people who managed to get off this island, but he wasn't one of them. Next we have There Are a Ton of Ghosts in There. When you make one of the most notorious prisons on the planet, there's going to be a little bit of bad blood from the people who are forced to live there, and when you have that many people in one place that are creating hatred towards the place, well, you better believe that there's going to be some spirits that want to muck the place up. If you are to visit the prison now, there's said to be a bunch of ghosts walking through the halls that can get aggressive at times. People have been touched when no one else is around. People have been pushed into walls like someone ran up and shoved them. There were reports that people were hearing someone yell into their ear. Not to mention all the regular ghost stuff that goes down there, like loud noises coming out of empty rooms, the sound of someone crying coming from an empty cell, and the feeling of cold spots, and a janitor that was held up against a wall by a ghost of a former inmate. Next we have the Beast. It would make sense that some sort of creature was able to manifest itself inside the walls of Alcatraz. I mean, there has been so much negative energy over there that a demon would probably get so much fuel it might have to take a nap because it would be too full and have the itis. I don't know if that's something that happens to supernatural beings, but if they can, I would assume that Alcatraz would be the place to give it to them. But it would seem that there is one creature who has claimed the rock and has been there ever since the prison was active. There have been reports of some sort of dark four-legged creature that will walk through the halls at night. It apparently has glowing red eyes and it's terrifying to look at. The most horrific telling of this creature is that an inmate started screaming one night that there was some sort of monster in his cell with him. His screams echoed through the whole prison, but the guards never came to come help him because in Alcatraz, it's going to take a lot more than claims of a monster in your cell for the guards to care about you. Well, in the morning when they found him, he was dead. Maybe he was just having a stroke, and because of this, he was hallucinating before he died. I don't even know if that's something that could happen before you die from a stroke. I'm just spitballing over here. Next on the list, we have the curse of the island. Alcatraz was built out on the rock in the middle of the ocean because they knew it would be hard for prisoners to get back to the mainland, and they would be forced to live out there until they died. They would even tell prisoners that there were sharks in the water, so if they tried to swim back, they would get eaten, and if they got caught trying to escape, they would be given solitary confinement. But little did the people building the prison know was that the island was cursed way before the prison was built, and all the stuff they said about sharks was actually lies. The Native Americans who lived in the area talked about how there have been dark spirits on the island, and the worst of their tribes would be outcasted to go live on that island. These dark beings were evil, and it said that their spirits would never move on to the afterlife. If that's true, then the whole island must be a breeding ground for some of the biggest, baddest spirits of all time. They have just been building up some negative energy, and now it's all going to explode and take over the world. Or maybe, I don't know, maybe not. Next on the list, we have Alcatraz was the ultimate correctional facility. Now, you're probably thinking that if you were a terrible criminal, you got sent to the rock because you were now outcasted from society, and people wanted you to rot out there. Well, you would be wrong. It was the worst prisoners that would get sent to the big prison floating in the middle of the ocean. You see, if you were acting up where you were already locked up, this could have been anything from starting a gang, to getting into fights, to bribing guards, to trying to run away. Then you would be shipped off to the place where they would get all that behavior to stop. That meant that the guards and the warden that were at Alcatraz were the hardest in the country. You would be brought there because you would be forced into line, and any of your antics would be thrown out the window. Alcatraz was known for creating model prisoners who would be broken down by the system. But with all that being said, we roll into some of the most rebellious prisoners with our next point. Next, we have the Battle of Alcatraz. So it would seem that the pressure of Alcatraz didn't turn everyone into a model prisoner. Some of the people used the time of being on hardcore lockdown to become even better criminals. In 1946, there was the Battle of Alcatraz, which was a 2-day standoff and one of the wildest things that has ever happened in prison history. It all starts with Bernard Paul Coy. This dude was not about to be just chilling in Alcatraz. He had all the people in the prison convinced that he was the model citizen, that he wouldn't cause any trouble, but he was scheming the whole time. He was watching the guards, figuring out their comings and goings. He was mapping everything out. Then he broke down a plan to few the people in the prison. The plan was to jump one of the guards, get some guns, and then escape. They launched their plan, and it didn't really go all the way through, and it didn't go as planned at all. Turns out they didn't have the keys to get out of the prison after they jumped the guard. They only had keys to get guns, and now they ended up in a standoff with the Coast Guard. It was a 2-day bloodbath, and all the men involved in the battle and attempted escape ended up getting killed. Next on the list, guys, we have Machine Gun Kelly. I didn't know that the rapper got his name from a dude who was actually one of the most notorious criminals in American history. George Kelly, also known as Machine Gun Kelly, was one of the best bootleggers of his era. He not only was running around making money off of all the booze he was selling, but he was also very loud about it. I mean, once you have a nickname, that's when you start to take things a little too far. You don't want to become a criminal with a nickname unless it's because they don't know your actual name. You gotta keep a low profile, my dude. Well, this dude would reach new levels of fame when he would pull off a kidnapping. One of the biggest oil men in America would be in the clutches of Kelly, and he wanted big bucks for his safe return. Unfortunately for Kelly, he wouldn't get his wish, and he would end up locked up at the Rock. He made claims that he would break out by Christmas, but he never got out. Next on the list, we have the original prisoners. Before The Rock was famous for being the hardest prison to break out of in America, it was a place where old Civil War POWs were taken, and back then they were given even worse conditions than the prisoners who were forced to live there in the 1940s. They basically had nothing to keep them alive. They would have a little bit of food to fight over, and that's it. No water, no bathrooms, no showers, no heat, and a bunch of them would be forced into one cell. Plenty of them died in that prison because of the horrible conditions, and it's rumored that it would take days for them to come to remove the dead bodies from the cells.
Starting off our list, in our number 10 spot, we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old, and of course people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone just might be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mevacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicki, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing drug. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found these people rude, or quote, too demanding. In our number 9 spot today, we have Daniel Perez. Also known as Lou Castro, Daniel led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on just being the worst. Basically, he had the really clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies to live a lavish lifestyle, like as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. Despite this, however, on April 21st, 2010, authorities were able to arrest Daniel, and he was charged with 28 felonies. In February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail, where he remains. In our number 8 spot today, we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles' history, that says a lot. In his original trial that led to his conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of stories, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. In our number 7 spot today, we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared like just a couple of harmless hippies. We all know not to judge a book by its cover though. In the end, they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco had so many witches running around. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked on a farm with because they said he was a demon, and the final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed that he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life, and of course neither of them have shown any kind of remorse for what they've done. In our number 6 spot today we have Samuel Dietman. Samuel is just one half of the pair known as the serial shooters. He, along with a man named Dale, were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random acts of violence, taking people's lives. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dale ended up taking his own life while on death row, which is why this point mainly focuses on Samuel, who remains in prison. In our number 5 spot today we have Keith Hunter Jesperson, also known as the Happy Face Killer. After the body of his first victim was found, Keith had someone else actually claim to be responsible for his crime. You would think that this would have been his ideal scenario, but that was not the case. He wanted to be known for his crimes, so to help himself get media attention, he drew a smiley face on a bathroom wall hundreds of miles away from his crime scene, and here he left an anonymous letter where he confessed to the crime and provided proof. He didn't end up receiving a reply, so he decided to write more letters to the media and to the authorities, each signed with a smiley face. In the end, Keith was initially caught after he became the prime suspect in the death of his girlfriend at the time. Previously, his victims had been people that he had no connection to, so this was truly the mistake the authorities needed to catch him. Keith then admitted to his crimes, and while he has formally been linked to 8 deaths, he has confessed to somewhere around 185. Keith was tried and sentenced to life without parole for his heinous crimes, and he remains in prison at Oregon State Penitentiary. In our number 4 spot today we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002, where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get him a job as a mafia hitman, and this is all that Quincy needed to be inspired. As soon as he was out of prison, he began practicing for his new upcoming career. Quincy started off his horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive this attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. In the end, the guards had to use rubber bullets to subdue the pair. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26, 2022, Quincy's death sentence was overturned. In our number 3 spot today we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those really arrogant ones who leaves the little notes for police promising to do it again, kind of like taunting them. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977, and he was indicted. He confessed to all of his crimes and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay. Sure. He was found mentally competent to stand trial, and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which we know, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has ever been able to confirm or deny these claims. In our number 2 spot today we have Sean Great. Sean is a serial killer who committed a series of crimes from 2006 until he was apprehended in 2016. Throughout his decade of criminal activity, it is thought that he took the lives of at least 5 people. In September 2016, Sean was arrested and later indicted for 2 killings, as well as kidnapping and harming a woman whose 911 call actually led to his arrest. At the same time, in another county next door, he was also being charged with 2 other deaths, as well as another one from all the way back in 2006. This final count from all of those years ago was actually an unsolved Jane Doe case who had been unidentified for 12 years. When Sean confessed to this crime, he wasn't even sure who she was, he just said that he believed her name was Dana. On May 7th, 2018, Sean was convicted on 2 of the counts, and on March 1st, 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 of the others, and on September 11th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to an additional count. In the end, he was sentenced to death and has remained on death row since that final plea and sentencing, and he is currently scheduled to be executed in 2025. In a very bittersweet turn of events, in June of 2019, that Jane Doe victim was finally able to be identified through the DNA Doe Project, and she was identified as 23-year-old Dana Nicole Lowry from Minden, Louisiana. It definitely can't bring her back, but there is a lot of comfort in knowing that her family finally received some answers. In our number 1 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1980, Glenn was working in California and wasn't really living a life of crime, so it's pretty surprising that in this year, he and his roommate decided to make a plan to rob someone they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. They then tried to blow up the crime scene to get rid of any evidence, but of course that didn't work and also just made them look even more insane. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison. At this new prison, he attempted escape again, and this time, he was actually successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried, unsuccessfully, to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican drug cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991. And since then, he's been on the run. Spot we have Jason Barnum. Jason Barnum, also known as Eyeball due to his tattooed right eye, is a figure who has gained notoriety for his life of crime and distinctive appearance. Born in Alaska, Barnum's life took a dark turn as he succumbed to a struggle with addiction and criminal activities. In 2012, Barnum's life of crime culminated in a series of events that would land him in a maximum security prison. He was involved in a string of burglaries, car thefts, and a shooting incident with the police that left an officer injured. His actions during this crime spree demonstrated a dangerous disregard for human life and the law. During his court proceedings, the judge, while acknowledging Barnum's difficult upbringing and struggles with addiction, sentenced him to 22 years in prison for his crimes. In our number 9 spot today, we have Alexander Pichushkin. Alexander Pichushkin is a figure of terror known by the spine-chilling epithet, the chessboard killer. His goal, as horrifying as it was unique, was to take a life for each space on a chessboard, a total of 64 individuals. This chilling ambition set him apart from other criminals and made him a feared figure not only in his operating base of Moscow, but also around the world. Alexander's reign of terror was marked by a level of brutality that left a trail of carnage in his wake. His victims were not merely killed, they were subjected to violent deaths that really showed the depth of his ruthlessness. The authorities eventually convicted him for 48 killings, however, Pichushkin himself claims a higher count, insisting that his total stands at 60 victims. Whether this claim is the truth or an attempt to inflate his notoriety remains uncertain. What is clear, however, is that the sheer scale of his crimes, coupled with his terrifying goal, makes him a figure of dread. His chilling ambition and the brutal reality of his crimes make Alexander Pichushkin a prisoner whose release would be a nightmare come true. In our number 8 spot today, we have Richard Lee McNair. Richard Lee McNair is a name that has become synonymous with cunning escapes and audacious evasion. Convicted for killering and burglary in the 80s, McNair's story took a turn for the extraordinary when he demonstrated a knack for escaping prison. Not once, but 3 times. His most infamous escape was from a maximum security prison in Louisiana in 2006. In a plot that seemed straight out of a Hollywood movie, McNair slipped out of the prison work detail by mailing himself out of the prison in a crate. Once outside, he managed to evade capture for over a year, leading authorities on a nationwide manhunt. McNair's ability to charm and deceive, coupled with his physical fitness, made him a formidable fugitive. His escapes escapes and subsequent recaptures were widely covered in the media, earning him a reputation as a real-life escape artist. Finally captured in Canada in 2007, McNair is now held in the Supermax prison ADX Florence in Colorado. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the lengths some prisoners will go to regain their freedom. Richard Lee McNair is undoubtedly a figure you pray never escapes again. In our number 7 spot today, we have Terry Nichols. Terry Nichols is a name that sends chills down the spine of anyone familiar with the horrific Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols, along with his accomplice Timothy McVeigh, orchestrated one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. On April 19, 1995, a truck exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people and injuring hundreds more. Nichols, a former army buddy of McVeigh's, was deeply involved in the planning and preparation of the attack. His anti-government sentiments and extremist beliefs fueled his participation in this act of terror. Following the attack, Nichols was quickly apprehended and brought to justice. In a trial that gripped the nation, Nichols was convicted of conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, as well as other charges relating to the seriousness of his crimes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and is currently held in the ADX Florence maximum security prison in Colorado, the same one we just talked about. In our number 6 spot today, we have Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway is a name that evokes a chilling sense of dread and is notoriously known as the Green River Killer. This ominous moniker stems from his gruesome modus operandi, which involved leaving the bodies of his victims along the Green River in Washington. The river, once a symbol of natural beauty, became a grim reminder of Ridgway's merciless killing spree. Ridgway's crimes were not sporadic instances of violence, but a series of premeditated killings that made him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. Officially, he was convicted of 49 crimes, but the actual number of his victims is believed to be at least double that count. What made Ridgway even more terrifying was not just the scale of his crimes, but also his attitude towards them. In a chilling display of lack of empathy, Ridgway confessed his crimes without any visible signs of emotion or remorse. This cold-blooded confession provided a terrifying insight into the mind of a remorseless killer, revealing a man devoid of any empathy or guilt for his heinous actions. The enormity of his crimes, coupled with his emotionless demeanor, makes Gary Ridgway a prisoner whose release would be a horrifying prospect. His chilling legacy continues to haunt those familiar with his story, making him a figure whose freedom is preyed against. In our number 5 spot today, we have Dennis Rader. Dennis Rader is more widely recognized by his chilling moniker BTK, an abbreviation which disturbingly describes his preferred method of killing. Rader's reign of terror spanned over 17 years in Wichita, Kansas, a time during which he took a perverse pleasure in his horrific acts, savoring the terror he instilled in the hearts of residents. Rader wasn't merely a man who committed heinous crimes, he was a sadist who reveled in his victims' suffering and the dread he inspired. His chilling letters to the police, where he arrogantly flaunted his crimes, added an extra layer of psychological terror to his spree. The letters served as a chilling reminder of his presence, keeping the community in a constant state of fear and uncertainty. These communications revealed a deeply disturbed mind, one that was not just content with the physical act of his horrific crimes, but also sought to manipulate and terrorize an entire community. Rader's pleasure in his cruel actions, his taunting letters, and the psychological torment he subjected Wichita to make the thought of this man walking free a very unsettling prospect, and one that will probably never come true, thankfully. In our number 4 spot today, we have Cleophas Prince Jr. In the shadowy realm of San Diego's suburban streets lurked a menacing phantom during the 1990s. Cleophas Prince Jr., at the time known as the Claremont Killer, turned the 90s into a real-life horror show. Over 9 dreadful months, he embarked on a relentless hunt, marking women as his prey in the seemingly serene Claremont neighborhood. To do this, he would either break into their homes when they least expected it, or sweet-talk them into some quiet, out-of-the-way spot. During his reign of terror, while the local news was all over it, the rest of the world hardly blinked. During this time, the stage of national and international press was captivated by other monstrous players such as Jeffrey Dahmer and Ted Bundy, which casted a horrific shadow that eclipsed the terrifying exploits of Cleophas. Thankfully, however, in September 1990, thanks to some top-notch detective work and breakthroughs in forensic science, they finally pinned the tail on the donkey. Cleophas Prince Jr., Mr. Claremont Killer himself, got nabbed. The courts threw the book at him, and now he is chilling behind bars for the rest of his days. No parole, no second chances. In our number 3 spot today, we have Pedro Rodrigues Filho. Also known as the Padrino Matador, he is a Brazilian serial killer who is believed to have killed over 70 people, mostly other criminals, in the 1960s and the 1970s. He had a very difficult childhood, as his father was a notorious criminal who actually really sadly harmed and killed his mother, and this of course had a profound influence on Pedro and his life. This experience is believed to have contributed to his violent behavior later in life. Pedro began his crime spree at a super young age, and he started with a horrific crime when he killed the vice mayor of his town, who he believed was responsible for the death of his girlfriend. He continued to kill other criminals, often targeting those who had previously wronged him or his family. Pedro was arrested in 1973 and was eventually convicted of killing 71 people. He is currently serving a prison sentence in Brazil and is known for his outspoken and unrepentant attitude towards his crimes. While I am sure we can all feel sympathy for the things that Pedro experienced in life, it truly is no excuse for the things that he chose to do. In our number 2 spot today, we have Charles Ng. Charles Ng is a name that will send chills down the spine, and he was a key player in the reign of terror that unfolded in the 1980s. Alongside his equally terrifying accomplice, Leonard Lake, Ng played a significant role in a series of crimes that remain etched into the annals of criminal history for their sheer depravity and cruelty. The grim saga began when Ng and Lake joined forces to unleash a wave of horror that would haunt their victims and the public alike. Their modus operandi was chilling. Unsuspecting individuals would be lured into their grasp only to be subjected to unimaginable torture, their final moments filled with fear and agony. What made their reign of terror even more horrifying was the duo's penchant for recording their despicable acts. These videos served as a chilling testament to their inhumanity, a grotesque spectacle of their victims suffering under their hands. Ng's role in these crimes was not that of a mere spectator. He was a very active participant, his cold-blooded nature making him a figure of dread. This, combined with his seeming indifference to the pain and suffering of his victims, made him one of the most feared inmates in the prison system. His heinous acts have left a dark stain on his name, making Charles Ng a prisoner that many pray to never see free again. And finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, a figure shrouded in infamy and widely recognized by his chilling moniker, the Son of Sam. He struck fear into the heart of New York City in the late 1970s. His name became synonymous with a wave of terror that swept through the city as he embarked on a series of shootings that left the public in a state of constant fear and uncertainty. Berkowitz's crimes were not random acts of violence. They were methodically planned and executed with a chilling precision that left the authorities baffled and the public on edge. Each attack added to the growing panic, creating an atmosphere of dread that permeated the city. But it wasn't just his crimes that made Berkowitz a figure of terror. His claims of demonic possession added a layer of horror to his already frightening persona. These claims, whether true or the product of a deranged mind, painted a picture of a man under the influence of dark forces, making him an even more unsettling figure. The combination of his heinous crimes, alleged demonic possession, and erratic behavior made him a prisoner that one would fervently pray never walks free again.
At number 10 is Michael Taylor. Exorcisms, often thought of as relics of the past, continue to haunt our modern world. In 2018, Indianapolis filed a staggering 1,700 requests for exorcisms. But now let's turn the clock back to 1974 to a chilling case involving a man named Michael Taylor in England. Taylor, once a seemingly innocent man, found himself spiraling into darkness after allegedly having an affair with the church leader Marie Robinson. His demeanor shifted drastically, and when caught in a compromising position with Robinson, he attributed his actions to a malevolent presence within him. Desperation led to an exorcism, banishing a reported 40 demons from Taylor's tormented soul in October of that year. Astonishingly, despite believing 3 demons lingered out of 40, they released him. But mere hours later, he was found drenched in red bodily fluids, claiming it was Satan's own. Tragically, however, it was his wife's blood. as he had taken her life. Taylor, declared insane, escaped a guilty verdict in a chilling tale of possession and despair. At number 9 is Louis Zambrano. In the realm of bizarre criminal defenses, this guy's claim to be possessed by the devil takes a rather prominent spot. It's a tale where the boundary between the reality and delusion becomes painfully evident. And while his trust issues may be a common theme in many relationships, attributing a gruesome unaliving to demonic possession sounds more like a scene from a horror movie than a courtroom. But, however, this case raises the questions about the human psyche and the lengths people will go to avoid responsibility for their actions. The devil is a figure deeply rooted in folklore and religion who often serves as a convenient scapegoat for unspeakable deeds. Zambrano's attempt to invoke such supernatural forces as his defense illustrates the intricate interplay between mental health, personal responsibility, and societal expectations. But in the end, justice prevailed, and Zambrano was held accountable for his actions regardless of his diabolical claims. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Arn Johnson. In 1981, Arn Johnson committed a brutal unaliving, but what set this apart is his chilling defense. You see, the devil made him do it. This macabre tale, infamous enough to inspire a Conjuring movie, delves into the darkest corners of human belief. See, Johnson didn't declare himself as Satan incarnate, but claimed to be a vessel for demonic forces. The courtroom became an arena where the supernatural clashed with the mundane, as the possession was used as a defense for the first time in American legal history. The eerie backdrop includes Johnson's prior presence at 3 exorcisms, fueling the belief in his diabolical connection. At number 7 is David Berkowitz, better known as the son of Sam. He was a convicted unaliver with a chilling belief that he was working for the devil. His twisted narrative involved a demon taking on the form of his neighbor's dog, which allegedly compelled him to commit heinous crimes. The macabre tale sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, doesn't it? In fact, The Conjuring 4, The Devil Next Door Made Me Do It, could be a fitting title. Berkowitz's reign of terror led to one of New York's most extensive manhunts, leaving authorities baffled and terrified. He audaciously left notes at crime scenes as if taunting the police, believing he'd never be apprehended. One has to wonder, if you were a devilish figure working a 9-to-5 shift in the underworld, wouldn't you have more places to hide? Ultimately, Berkowitz was captured, and while he later admitted to fabricating the dog story, he claimed involvement in a satanic cult, asserting that his crimes were orchestrated as part of their grand, sinister agenda. It's a chilling glimpse into the mind of a man who believed he was doing the devil's bidding. At number 6 is Cody Lott. Lott's belief that he consorted with the devil sheds light on the complexities of the human psyche. See, while some may dismiss these claims as mere excuses, they serve as a chilling reminder to the power of delusions that are able to drive individuals to commit such unthinkable acts. Understanding the psychological intricacies behind such cases is essential, not just for the sake of justice, but also to prevent similar tragedies in the future, reminding us that the human mind can be a labyrinth of darkness where even the most unimaginable beliefs can take root, leading to unthinkable consequences. At number 5 is Nikolai Golubov. In August of 2008, Russia bore witness to a gruesome tale. See, deep within a forest, 4 bodies emerged, victims of a sinister act orchestrated by this Nikolai, leader of a group who believed themselves to be Satan's servants. They saw these human sacrifices as offerings to please Lucifer in a dark initiation rite. Shockingly, their ghastly crime unfolded just 250 meters from Nikolai's own home, and a chilling 101 rules of the Satanist document was recovered near one of the victims. Nikolai received a 20-year prison sentence, while his cohorts faced punishments ranging from 8 to 10 years. At number 4 is Ronald DeFeo's case. Often overshadowed by Hollywood's sensationalism, this was a gruesome and tragic one. Unlike the supernatural portrayal in Amityville Horror, his story is rooted in a chilling reality. Convicted of unaliving his entire family, DeFeo left behind a trail of conflicting accounts regarding that fateful night. His recent passing at the age of 69 shed a light on some of the disturbing letters he had written. In one, he boldly declared, quote, "There was no demon. You know who the demon is. I am the demon." This declaration raises a lot of haunting questions. Was DeFeo genuinely possessed, or was he merely acknowledging the darkness within himself? Such a proclamation hardly bolsters his credibility, further clouding the already perplexing case. It serves as a stark reminder of the complex and often enigmatic nature of criminal psychology. At number 3 is Sam Little, a name that should send shivers down the spine, as it stands as a chilling testament to the darkest corners of human history. His gruesome confession to the slayings of over 90 individuals places him amongst the most notorious of serial unalivers. While authorities could conclusively link him to only 30 of these 90 heinous acts, there remains little doubt about the veracity of his other ambitions. What allowed Sam to perpetuate these horrors with impunity for so long was his cunning choice of diverse locations for his crimes, meticulously avoiding connection between them. In a haunting conversation with investor Sergeant LeBlanc, the discussion veered towards matters of faith and sin, and astonishingly, Sam expressed an eerie absence of fear towards a higher power, contending that he was crafted by a divine hand. His unsettling declaration that he believed himself to be the embodiment of the evil, the devil, adds another layer of mystique to an already profoundly disturbing narrative. At number 2 is H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes is America's very first serial unaliver, who led a very gruesome legacy, as one might imagine. After medical school, he embarked on a unaliving rampage, luring victims into a nightmarish home equipped with traps and secret chambers. He not only eliminated but also manipulated women for their wealth and made employees name him as their life insurance beneficiary. Estimates suggest he claimed over 200 lives. Before his execution, Holmes chillingly remarked, quote, "I was born with the very devil in me." In this, we find a common thread among prisoners throughout history who believe themselves to be the personification of the devil. At number 1 is Richard Ramirez, also known as the Night Stalker, who sent chills down the spines of many during the grim 1980s in Los Angeles. See, he wasn't just your run-of-the-mill serial unaliver. He left behind a haunting mark that fueled the flames of the satanic panic. Dubbed the, quote, walk-in unaliver due to his home invasion spree, Ramirez had an eerie signature: satanic messages strewn across his crime scenes. This macabre touch sent shockwaves, with authorities initially fearing a Charles Manson copycat. But Ramirez was his own unique breed of monster. Pentagrams adorned his crime scenes, and he'd compel victims to pledge allegiance to Satan over God before unaliving them. In court, he'd ominously clutch a pentagram and defiantly hail Satan after pleading not guilty. Ramirez is a true embodiment of evil who became a nightmarish figure in the annals of criminal history. Although horrifying, these cases aren't the only instances where prisoners have believed themselves to be the devil. Throughout history, individuals have claimed sinister connections, often using such narratives to justify their heinous actions.
Number 10, Jason Brian Dalton. Some people think that demons and possession usually happens at a crossroads or maybe even with a Ouija board, but this is the 21st century. Jason Brian Dalton blamed it on his phone. He was an Uber driver, and on the evening of February 20th, he used a weapon to take the lives of multiple people. Dalton said that when he opened up the Uber app, he was presented with the symbol of the Eastern Star, which represents God on Earth. But apparently it wasn't God communicating with him through the phone, as he says that an image of the devil's head appeared on his screen, which he describes as looking like a cow with horns. He said that from that night, he could barely remember anything, except that the devil would apparently tell him where to go and whose lives to take, saying that it was like the devil completely took over his body and mind. Then when police apprehended him, he said that the screen on his phone went from black to red, and that the devil was no longer in control after that point. Number 9, Arnie Johnson. It's impossible to go through any discussion about this topic without talking about this one specific case, and I'm sure you were all expecting to hear it, so let's get it out of the way. In 1981, a man named Arnie Johnson killed his landlord, and the events went on to inspire the movie The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. Before the night of the crime, Arnie's fiance's brother appeared to become possessed by the devil, speaking in strange languages and his eyes turning black, among other things. As time went on, Arnie would start taunting the demon, telling him to leave the brother alone and take him instead. He then went to investigate a spooky well and supposedly saw a demon, who took over his body and committed the crime. When he went on trial, his team pleaded not guilty by reason of demonic possession, a pretty bold move. Of course, the judge didn't accept this, and Arnie was sentenced, only ending up serving about 5 years before he was released and married his fiancée. Number 8, Pazuzu Algarad. In North Carolina, a man going by the name of Pazuzu Algarad was arrested after it was discovered he had been burying bodies of his victims. He had taken on the name Pazuzu in reference to the demon from The Exorcist, and had even undergone some strange body modification, making his tongue forked and sharpening his teeth. If that's already not weird enough for you, the man who was at the property when the bodies were discovered had a lot to say about Algarad. He said that the man was possessed by demons and that they would take over his body about once a month, usually around a full moon. He described it as being very serpentine and said that the man's eyes would get glazy, saying it was like the inner part of the man would fade away. And he also said that Algarad would sacrifice animals once a month. The interior of the home was also terrifying, as the walls were apparently covered in graffiti and dark symbols, and the building was deemed unsafe for human life. Number 7. Pamela Furnett. In Norfolk, Virginia, 2 police officers were called to the scene after receiving reports of a man screaming and yelling in the street, and it didn't end when they got there. The man apparently swore at the police and assaulted them, even biting one of the officers on the hand. Pretty strange, but I'm sure we've all bitten someone at some point, right? Well, it gets just a little bit weirder. A woman named Pamela Furnett is apparently the wife of the man who had attacked the officers and had apparently been begging them not to hurt him despite his actions. She said that her husband hadn't been in his right mind because he had been possessed by a demon. Pamela said that she had even managed to catch the demon on camera and knew that it had possessed her husband, saying, "I caught it on camera, a demon, it really was, so I figured that's what got him." Unfortunately, I couldn't really find much more information on this other than the original report, so we may never know just what Pamela actually saw that day. Number 6. Tommy Smith. In February of 2015, a young man named Tommy Smith saw a car that he wanted, and he wanted it bad. Instead of, say, saving up money and purchasing it, he instead decided to steal the keys from the 65-year-old man driving the car. But when the man wouldn't give in, Smith got angry, attacking him with a weapon so aggressively that he even managed to snap it in half. Fortunately, the elderly man was able to survive but suffered serious physical and mental damage as a result. When Smith went on trial for the attack, he said that he had started suffering from hallucinations a few weeks before the crime took place and had actually been possessed by a demon at the time of the attack. Similar to Arnie Johnson, the court didn't want to hear it and noted the young man's history of schizophrenia. He ended up being charged but didn't go to jail, instead being sent to a mental hospital until they saw fit for him to be released. Number 5. David Berkowitz. Throughout the 1970s, a man named David Berkowitz terrorized New York City. After already becoming a serial arsonist, he apparently started to hear the voices of demons in his head telling him to commit crimes. When he moved to a new home, he started to believe that his neighbors and their dogs were possessed by demons. And when he moved to a new apartment in the same area, his neighbor was a retiree named Sam, who he believed was a powerful demon. Sam's dog named Harvey was also apparently a demon, and Berkowitz believed that the dog was telling him to kill. His neighbor's name of Sam is also how he got his later name, which was Son of Sam. Soon after, people were turning up dead and police were trying to figure out who it was. During a break from the crimes, Berkowitz wrote a note to the New York Post that said, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." He was eventually caught for the crimes and received a whopping 365 years in prison, where he apparently became a born-again Christian. Number 4. Nikolai Golubiak. Of course, things like this don't just happen in America, so let's head over to Russia in August of 2008. In a forest outside of a Russian town, 4 bodies were discovered, all seemingly having gone through something pretty terrible. It turned out that the crime had been committed by 6 self-proclaimed Satanists, the group being led by a man named Nikolai. They believed that human sacrifices were required to please Lucifer, or the devil, and the crime had been a part of an initiation ritual. The bodies had been discovered only 250 meters from Nikolai's own home, and one of the bodies had a sheet of paper that contained 101 rules of the Satanists. The young man received 20 years in prison, while the rest of the members of the group received various different charges ranging from 8 to 10 years. This isn't the first time that a crime has been committed for the sake of a ritual or cult, and it certainly won't be the last. Number 3. Cody Lott. Over the years, men have been known to do crazy things over unrequited love, and this story is especially tragic. 2 young women were walking down a footpath in September of 2016 when they were approached by a man in a car. That man was named Cody Lott. He then attacked both the girls with a weapon, only one of them surviving the event. At his trial that took place 2 years later in 2018, Lott claimed that he had actually spoken with the devil, and that the devil had even helped him to plan the attack, saying it was due to one of the girls having a boyfriend and his own in frustration over not having been able to find a romantic partner. Due to these claims, he was found mentally unfit to stand trial and sent to the maximum security unit of a Texas mental hospital. After he was released and was able to stand trial, he was sentenced to life in prison. Oddly, his parents then sued the state of Wichita to get the weapon used in the crime back, saying it had been stolen from their apartment, so I guess it was pretty important to them. Number 2. Louis Zambrano. On September 10th, 2015, in Queens, New York, a body was discovered. It was the body of Angie Escobar, who had apparently died after being attacked with a pair of scissors, reportedly having been there for about 4 days before she was found. Police were quick to find a suspect, arresting the woman's short-term boyfriend, Louis Zambrano, who had attempted to run away to Virginia. When put on trial, he claimed that he had 2 reasons for the attack. 1, demonic possession, and number 2, trust issues. One of these things is not like the other. Everyone who heard his declaration was disgusted, both the victim's family and the judge calling him out on his ridiculous claim, believing he was clearly using it as a poor excuse. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, also receiving an extra 3 years for an unrelated burglary charge. And I wonder if that one was the devil's fault too. Number 1, Michael Taylor. A lot of people think that exorcisms are a thing of the past, but they're most definitely not. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis reportedly receiving around 1,700 exorcism requests in the year of 2018 alone. Back in 1974, an exorcism took place in England, the possessed man being Michael Taylor. He had joined a church and allegedly started having an affair with the congregation leader, Marie Robinson. During the time they spent together, Taylor went from a seemingly happy man to a more angry and irritable one, until eventually the two were caught naked together and Taylor blamed it on an evil presence or demon that was within him. A vicar was called in to perform an exorcism on him, and in October of that year, they reportedly expelled a whopping 40 demons from his body. Despite them believing that there were still 3 evil demons inside him, they let him go on his way. And only a few years later, he was found covered in blood, and he said it was the blood of Satan himself. Well, it was actually the blood of his wife, him having taken her life. Taylor was put on trial but was found not guilty due to reason of insanity.
Starting us off at number 10 is John Justin Bunting. Known as the ringleader for the infamous Snowtown killings, Bunting is responsible for the death of 11 people in South Australia between 1992 and 1999. John Justin Bunting was a troubled man known to have an intense hatred for homosexuals as well as people interested in minors. And while I think we can all agree that it's understandable he hated those interested in minors, the problem is that he never had any proof that his victims were criminals of such things and would just assume they were because they were also gay. Most of his victims were either friends, roommates, or relatives, and along with his 3 other conspirators, he would kidnap the victims, then torture them in various sick ways before taking their lives. The case was uncovered when the remains of 8 people were found in barrels of acid in Snowtown, Australia. Then 3 days later, 2 more victims were found buried in a backyard. Allegedly, their final victim was fried and eaten by Bunting and his gang. After a series of trials, Bunting was ultimately declared the ringleader and was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. The others faced similar charges, each serving 1 life sentence per charge, and these monsters will thankfully be locked up until their last days. Next up at number 9, Andre Thomas. Early on in life, Andre was unfortunately very badly abused by his mother and began to experience crushing auditory hallucinations at the age of 10. Then in 1999, while in grade 9, he met Laura, who soon became pregnant and brought Andre Jr. into the world later that year. Now with a son, Andre decided to drop out of high school and get a job to support his family, and by the age of 18, he and Laura finally married. The marriage, however, was short-lived, as Laura quickly caught on to the realities of his mental health issues and separated from Andre 4 months later. Tragically, however, the separation took a devastating toll on Andre's not yet diagnosed condition, which began convincing him that Laura was Jezebel and Andre Jr. was the Antichrist, and that he had to kill them. Finally, in March of 2004, Andre broke into her apartment and killed the entire family, each with a separate blade, as he claimed he did not want want to contaminate their blood and allow the demons inside of them to live. After the incident, he attempted to take his own life. However, when that didn't go to plan, he removed one of his eyes instead. Eventually, after a long trial, he was sentenced to death for his crimes until 3 years later when he removed his remaining eye and ingested it. While his sentence did not change officially, this incident catapulted Andre to be relocated to a psych ward as he was eventually seen as not adequately fit to be executed. Coming in at number 8, the Icebox Killer. On June 2nd, 1991, 23-year-old Denise attended a concert in LA and began making her way home to Orange County around 2 a.m. However, the next morning when her parents, who she lived with, woke to find she wasn't there, they called police to make sure she hadn't been in an accident or hurt somehow. But all that was found was Denise's car on the side of a freeway with a drained battery. And for 3 years, no one had any clue where she was. That was until July of 1994 when a woman arrived at the house of a man named John Famorello to purchase some paint. While there, she saw what appeared to be a very old rental car in her driveway, and after getting a strange feeling about him, she reached out to authorities who determined the car was stolen. Still not connecting the two incidents, a police officer arrived on site to speak to John about the stolen vehicle. But when he arrived, he noticed an electrical cord running to a freezer from the back of the truck. Initially believing he was running some kind of lab, the deputy reached out to a locksmith to open the back of the truck. But to his horror, the body of a young, beaten, and tortured woman was inside, who was later determined to be the missing woman, Denise Huber. And tragically, after investigating the property, it became evident she had likely not been his only victim. John was convicted and sentenced to death in 1997 and remains locked up in California awaiting his fate. Coming in at number 7, the Pig Farmer Killer. Robert William Picton, or Willie, is a Canadian pig farmer responsible for killing 49 women between 1982 to 2002. Willie was known to be a fairly quiet and simple guy by his friends and family, and after his parents' death took over the family farm in 1980. But once he was in charge of the farm, he would soon become a monster. While it's not known exactly the detail of each crime, it's believed he would engage with escorts and then in the middle of, well, you know, would get extremely angry and blame them for thefts or crimes. The situation would escalate and he would ultimately handcuff the victims before attacking them and take their lives. But the creepiest part is that from there, he would take the bodies of his victims and put them through a wood chipper before feeding it to his pigs. And it's believed that some of the resulting bits would get mixed in with pork mince and sold to friends and family. Upon his 2002 arrest for his crimes, Willie admitted to all accounts and was even disappointed as he was trying to round out his tally to an even 50 prior to being caught. Willie was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for at least 25 years, although it seems highly unlikely they are ever going to let him leave. Coming in at number 6, Randy Stephen Kraft. Between 1972 to 1983, Randy Stephen Kraft became known as the Scorecard Killer after being found responsible for the death of 16 young men in California. However, although only convicted of 16 victims, it's believed he harmed, tortured, and killed up to 67 men in the area. After high school graduation in 1963, Randy's plan was to become a US Senator, and so he enrolled in college for economics. However, through his college years, he began to distance himself from his previous dreams and started drinking, partying, and getting himself into trouble. After just barely graduating, Randy joined the US Air Force and rose to Airman First Class. However, by 1969, he was discharged after the Army discovered he was gay. Around this same time, Kraft became distant from his family as they did not really approve of his sexuality either, and by 1970, he committed his first known essay on a boy. The following years, Kraft became obsessed and would lure young men, often of military background, to his van, then drug and take advantage of them before torturing their bodies until death and dumping them along the nearest freeway. This pattern repeated for over 10 years until he was finally caught and sentenced to death, where he now remains locked up awaiting his inevitable fate. Next up at number 5, BTK. To the public and his community, he was a totally normal, polite, and well-mannered man. Rader was an active member of his church and was actually elected president of the church council and even volunteered as a Cub Scout leader. He had a wife and kids who would describe him as a totally average and nice guy. But Rader had a dark secret that would soon change everything. Despite his outward persona, he was actually a truly disturbed man and was into some pretty terrifying things in the bedroom that eventually leaked their way into his crimes. To start off, I'll give you a hint. BTK is an abbreviation that stands for bind, torture, kill. And it was disturbing things along those lines that he liked to do to, as he put it, trapped and helpless women. But if a woman wasn't available, he would take pictures of himself in women's clothing wearing a mask of a woman's face and bind himself as he seemed to enjoy living out a fantasy as his own victims. Between 1974 to 1991, Dennis Rader killed 10 women in Wichita, Kansas, and was known to send taunting letters to the authorities and media describing his crimes in gruesome detail. There was then a strange hiatus in his crimes for about 10 years, but thankfully this creep was arrested in 2005 and is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences, one for each woman he killed. Coming in at number 4, George Emil Banks. Despite having a previous criminal record for an armed offense, Banks managed to get a job as a correctional officer in 1980. However, in 1982, Banks began worrying coworkers after he kept saying things like a race war would soon consume the world and that he wanted to protect his sons and daughters from the torment and agony of racism. Then, after a conflict with a supervisor, he was put on extended leave from the prison and ordered to be examined for mental health issues. Not long after his mandated leave from work, Banks, having consumed massive amounts of drugs and alcohol, tragically killed 13 people, 9 of which were his own family members, 3 former in-laws, and 1 bystander. Unbeknownst to Banks, his former brother-in-law was able to survive by hiding in the closet and called police to identify the attacker as Banks. Eventually, police were able to track him down at a friend's house, and after a 4-hour standoff, they were able to draw him out. During the trial, Banks explained his crimes by saying he did not want his offspring to be victimized in a race war, as he had suffered from racism much of his life as a biracial man. This explanation, however, did not sway the jury, and he was convicted to life in prison, where he remains to this day. Coming in at number 3, Joseph Fritzl. One of the most heartbreaking cases I have ever read about is the case of Joseph Fritzl. Born in 1935 in Austria, at 21 he married a girl named Rosemary, and the pair had a family of 7 together. Now, he was a very abusive man to everyone in his family, but especially Elizabeth. However, the peak of his cruelty began when Elizabeth was 18 and he lured her into the basement, where he trapped her for the next 24 years. In those 24 years, he assaulted her constantly, and during her imprisonment, she gave birth to 7 people. Of course, over the years, many were concerned about Elizabeth's disappearance, but Fritzl would lie and say that she ran off to join a cult, and that he had no clue where she was. One day, after one of Elizabeth's offspring was ill, she managed to convince him to take her to the hospital, and once they arrived, police were on site to detain them. After making sure she would never be forced to see her father again, Elizabeth told authorities everything that her father ever did to her and her little ones, and Fritzl was sentenced to life for his crimes. Coming in at number 2, Gary Ridgway. Gary grew up in a troubled household with very little stability, which led to him wetting the bed well into his teen years. However, after each incident, his mother would clean him up, leading Gary to have conflicting feelings of both anger and desire towards his mother, often fantasizing fantasizing about killing her and doing unspeakable things to her corpse. When he got older, he joined the military, and it was during his time in combat that he became obsessed with escorts. Once he returned back to America, his first marriage ended quickly after his wife discovered he had given her multiple infections. Soon after, he married again, this time finding salvation in the church. He forced his wife into a staunch and devout life, but in contrast, kept his ravenous appetite for inappropriate relations with those whose company he paid for. But Ridgway had an inner conflict about his desires, and so he started strangling the women after he had got what he wanted from them, dumping their brutalized bodies into the woods. Disgustingly, it was later revealed by one of his wives that he would often ask to have relations in the woods. At the time, she didn't know why, but during investigations, multiple of his victims were found buried in those woods, and authorities believe he got pleasure from being in the area. Upon his arrest, he was officially convicted for taking 49 lives, but during trial, he famously said he had killed so many that he lost count and that he didn't even know the real number anymore. Last up in our number 1 spot, Edmund Kemper. One of the most notorious killers of the 20th century, early on Kemper showed signs of strange behavior. It started out with torturing insects, but by age 10 he buried his pet cat alive, waited for it to die, then dug it up, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a spike. From there, things only got more concerning. By the age of 13, his parents divorced and his mother became his sole parental figure. However, she was an abusive alcoholic who mocked and humiliated the boy, and so their relationship turned into an extremely toxic one. At 14, Kemper ran away from home to try and be with his father, but eventually ended up living with his grandparents, and that is where things got really bad. At age 15, he killed both his grandparents and was arrested for the crimes. However, due to his age, he didn't face any criminal charges. By 1969, on his 21st birthday, he was released on parole against his psychologist's warning and sent to live with his mother. Kemper, however, hated his mother, and the two fought non-stop. By 1972, he began seeking out college student victims after a fight with his mother, and by 1973, he had taken the lives of 8 different women this way, becoming known in the public as the co-ed killer. Finally, in April of 1973, he bludgeoned his mother in her sleep before doing awful, unspeakable things to her decapitated head, and then called over her best friend and killed her too before turning himself in. In the end, Kemper was sentenced to life in prison despite his request to be tortured to death, and will remain behind bars until his final day.
And we're starting things off with Alan Legere, aka the Monster of Miramichi. Born in 1948 in New Brunswick, this guy committed a robbery with 2 accomplices in 1986 that resulted in the brutal beating of both of the owners, who were an elderly couple, one of which, the husband, John Glending, did not survive. The trio were arrested, and Legere began serving time at the Atlantic Institution Maximum Security Penitentiary. In 1989, he was transported to a hospital due to an ear infection, and it was there that he would make his escape. He pleaded with the guards to allow him to go to the washroom alone, and somehow he managed to get them to agree. Once he was inside the bathroom, he pulled out the small sharpened piece of metal he'd hidden up his rear, and picked the lock to his handcuffs. He fled from the hospital, and through a series of carjackings managed to avoid being captured for 7 whole months. And he didn't lay low during this time either. He took the lives of 4 more people in completely random attacks. He burnt a victim's home down with 2 sisters inside, attacked another woman, Annie Flam, and her sister. This sister managed to make it out alive, and he took the life of Reverend Father James Smith. He was finally arrested again though, and remains in prison till this day. Number 9, Nikolai Zamugliev, aka Metal Fang. Nikolai took the lives of at least 5 women, engaging in brutal acts of violence that shocked the nation. He would then consume some of the body parts of his victims. His crimes earned him the nickname Metal Fang due to the dental work he used to bite his victims. He'd lost some of his teeth in a fight when he was younger, being fitted with metal dentures. In 1979, he was finally captured and sent to a mental hospital. He was released in just less than a year though, and guess what? He took the lives of 3 more victims, the last of which was actually a friend of his. He invited some friends over for a dinner party, and at one point, guests found him in the next room, having crouched next to his friend, eating him. He would spend 8 years in a treatment center, but while being transported to another facility in 1989, he managed to escape. He managed to stay hidden for years, living in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan. He likely would have been found if it weren't for the fact that he got tired of this life and basically turned himself in. He remains housed in a specialized psychiatric clinic to this day. Next on the list is Gonzalo Lopez. Lopez was a convicted criminal with multiple life sentences. He made his escape from prison in May 2022, serving life terms for taking the life of Jose Ramirez in 2006 and the shooting of 2 police officers. Lopez saw an opportunity during a hospital transfer. While being transported with 15 other inmates, he seized the moment, stabbing the corrections officer before making off with the vehicle. Police shot the tires, but he managed to drive for another mile before crashing it and then fleeing into the forest. Lopez remained a fugitive, managing to evade law enforcement for several weeks. Tragically, on June 2nd, he resurfaced at a family ranch in Centerville, Texas, where he committed a horrific act, resulting in the deaths of 5 individuals, 66-year-old Mark Collins and his 4 grandchildren. The manhunt for Lopez intensified, and later that same day, a shootout between Lopez and the police broke out. In the end, Lopez got what he deserved and no officers were harmed. Number 7, the Texas 7. Texas 7 was a group of 7 convicts who pulled off a prison escape in December of 2000. These inmates, serving sentences for various crimes, were all going to be in prison for a long time, and feeling like they had nothing to lose, they planned an escape. They managed to overpower and subdue prison employees at the John B. Connolly unit in Kennedy, Texas. Using stolen weapons and clothing, they took advantage of a maintenance truck's cover and made their getaway. Their escape set off a massive manhunt across Texas. The group was on the run for over a month, committing a series of robberies and other crimes to help sustain themselves. They even took the life of a police officer during a robbery. The Texas 7's run came to an end though on January 22nd, 2001 in Woodland Park, Colorado, when a tip led authorities to their hideout. There'd been an episode, I believe, I can't remember the show, Unsolved Mysteries or something, where they showed them and like a bunch of people phoned in being like, I think I've seen those guys. Anyway, there was a standoff with law enforcement. One member took his own life and the rest were apprehended. The majority of them are now on death row. Next up, we have Sharon Kinney. Unlike most of the criminals on this list, Sharon has still yet to be found. Suspected of being responsible for the deaths of 3 individuals, including her husband, James, and the wife of a boyfriend in 1960. Kinney's actions led to a series of trials. She faced 3 unsuccessful attempts at prosecution for the death of her husband. As the 4th trial loomed, Kinney made a bold move and fled off to Mexico to evade justice. And while in Mexico, she became involved in yet another deadly encounter, claiming self-defense when she shot and killed a man. But Mexican authorities, they just weren't buying it, and she ended up being convicted, landing her in Mexican prison with a 13-year sentence. On December 7th, 1969, just 4 years into her sentence, she capitalized on the facility's lax security measures. There was also a prison blackout, which helped, and she ended up making her escape, slipping away into the night, never to be seen again. To this day, Sharon Kinney remains at large, holding one of the longest outstanding warrants in American history. At our number 5 spot, Richard Matt and David Sweat were 2 dangerous inmates who pulled off a daring escape from Clinton Correctional Facility in Dannemora, New York in 2015. These criminals used cunning and tools to cut through steel walls and pipes within their cells, and over a period of months, they created this series of tunnels and passages within the prison's walls, leading to the catwalks and utility tunnels. On the night of June 6, 2015, Matt and Sweat made their move. They crawled through the labyrinth of passages they'd made, emerging through a manhole cover outside the prison's walls. Of course, a manhunt was launched with with law enforcement across the state and beyond joining in on the hunt. They managed to evade capture for a number of weeks, robbing cabins and seeking refuge in the wilderness. Richard Matt lost his life at the hands of law enforcement on June 26th. David Sweat was captured again 2 days later, weakened and suffering from gunshot wounds. Next on the list is Donald Leroy Evans. This guy was an absolute despicable prick. He took the lives of multiple people between 1985 and 1991. The true extent of these crimes I can't get into. He did more than just strangle people to death, though. He would usually attack his victims at rest stops and public parks, and even though he was initially only connected to 3 cases, he later admitted to being responsible for the unsolved deaths of 70 other people across 22 states. In June of 1993, while in custody at Harrison County Jail, he managed to escape along with 3 other inmates. Luckily, it didn't take the cops long to find him. He had been hiding out in a shed. Evans ended up getting the death penalty, but his death would come much quicker than it likely would have. Thankfully, he was stabbed in the shower by a fellow death row inmate in 1999. And at number 3, Alexander Solonik, nicknamed Russian Jackal and Alexander the Great. This guy was a Russian mob hitman and was damn good at his job. He was also really good at escaping from prison apparently, which he did a number of times. The long arm of justice had finally caught up with him and he was arrested, but he managed to escape out of the courthouse window, fleeing to Siberia. He was caught and arrested again, spending 2 years in jail for escaping through the ventilation system. He went back to working as a hitman, but after a shootout in 1995, he was arrested once again in Moscow. The mob managed to bribe a guard to help him escape this time, and he exited his cell, scaling the wall with help of a rope and some climbing gear, and then entered into a waiting BMW. He headed to Greece, where he intended to spend the rest of his days, I guess, and that's exactly what happened, only he didn't live as long as he wanted or expected to. The mob wanted to tie up any loose ends and enlisted one of Solonik's very own friends, a fellow hitman, to take him out. This guy sounds like the real-life John Wick or something. Next on the list we have James Earl Ray. Ray, who was serving a 99-year prison sentence for killing civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., managed to escape from prison for a second time on August 7th of 1997. This escape occurred at the Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary in Tennessee. Ray and 6 other inmates managed to escape, but their freedom was short-lived as law enforcement launched a massive manhunt, and just 3 days later, on June 13th, he was recaptured in a wooded area about 8 miles from the prison. His second escape was not as successful as his first. Had also been in prison for something else before that incident and managed to escape for months or something like that. Ultimately, though, led to tighter security measures in the prison system, and Ray would spend the rest of his life behind bars, dying in prison in 1998. Finally, though, at number 1, we have Ted Bundy. If you want to talk about one of the most notorious criminals in American history, this guy was definitely one of them. Managed to escape authorities on 2 separate occasions. In 1977, Ted Bundy pulled off 2 daring escapes from custody. The first escape took place in Aspen, where he was awaiting trial. Bundy decided to represent himself in court, which gave him access to the law library at Pickens County Courthouse. And on June 7th, he made his move. Unshackled and unguarded, he jumped out of a second-floor window of the courthouse. Took authorities 6 days to catch him again. The second escape happened later that same year, on December 30th. While he was incarcerated, Bundy managed to carve a hole in the ceiling of his cell. Through his makeshift tunnel, he crawled to freedom. Not only was this guy a truly evil human being, but he was cunning and resourceful on top of it. Not a good combination. Good for him, but not good for everyone else.